Hello, Evelina. Hello, everyone watching.
So welcome to our Wellbeing Research Insights with Elite Mind, and those are our weekly conversations when we discuss a variety of topics from organizational well-being industry, and often highlighting things that stay behind the closed doors. So we have a privilege often supporting companies through issues, through personal struggles, as well as work, and I'm so sorry. I've end up streaming things and multiple channels, and I can hear my voice back. So I've just been distracted. Yeah. So I was just saying, like we privileged to sometimes work with the companies to support them through some of these really challenging situations. So it is only fair that we share those learnings to prevent some of those issues in advance. So Valentina, would you like to introduce our topic for today?
Absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about something that happens to a lot of people and actually doesn't kind of always get highlighted as a top well-being issue at work, and that's divorce. So we're going to be looking at divorce and how that can affect the individual emotionally, but also practically, and how both of those emotional and practical implications in their personal private life, how that can then impact their experience of work, their levels of productivity, relationships with colleagues and things like that. And then we'll also be looking at how the organization can recognize this, the impact of this on the individual and on the workplace, and what they can actually do to support someone going through the divorce.
And what was very interesting that, of course, we have our kind of our own lived experiences, our working experiences of supporting other individuals and workplaces through these scenarios. But also, it was very interesting to just do a little bit of research. What kind of information is available publicly to support? And a lot of information are actually focusing on, especially within HR, a lot of information is focused on kind of protecting the business from this employee. And there were some even comments like how to handle employees going through divorce. And it was really it was painful to read really some of those comments, because when you think of a divorce or separation in general, some of those big life events can be so upsetting and so unsettling. And now to think that you are also being seen as a nuisance to the business, right? Rather than really being seen as a human being with your own struggles and needs, it's something that I think, the language probably illustrates the mentality of the society at work, how willing we are really to support people through these kind of scenarios.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important kind of when we start, going into this emotional impact on the individual and how that's handled by the workplace. It's important to recognize that for an individual, this isn't, it's very different the way a workplace might treat a bereavement, for example, as that's something that happens to an individual and something that is kind of outside of their control and is, hugely emotionally impactful. And we need to really look at divorce in a similar sense because, research from the University of Virginia found that divorce ranks as one of life's most stressful events, and actually second only to the death of a spouse. So that's a incredibly kind of complex emotional journey for an employee or an individual to be going through, involving grief, involving, an uprooting of routines, lifestyle, social circles, support networks, all of this. And so, companies, it's very important recognize this as not just something that might be taking up an individual's time in their private life and might be disrupting them somewhat in their work, but actually this is a huge life event that they are going through emotionally as well.
Absolutely. So building on some of those stats that you've said, 90% of people said the separation had a negative impact on their life and on their ability to perform at work. 50% of people were afraid that they will lose their jobs. So that means that, again, their performance must have been significantly affected to the point that they were afraid of losing their jobs. 95% felt that anxiety and mental health levels were some of these biggest struggles, causing some of these difficulties at work as well. 75% said they were less efficient at work, and 40% were not able to work and needed to take some time off work. So those are really huge, significant numbers of people in terms of how they are affected.
Absolutely. You know, this, I think it's important to highlight just how high those statistics are. So once an organization finds out that someone is going through divorce, that is going to mean that really for certain their working experience is going to be impacted. You know, the emotional turmoil of divorce has been shown to lead to increased rates of depression and anxiety, as you mentioned, especially during the initial stages as well. That's why it's important to kind of act quickly. And that emotional toll can really, really affect an individual's ability to focus and engage effectively in their work. And it also, studies show that it leads to lower life satisfaction and the subjective sense of well-being. So people feel that their well-being is worth their overall kind of less satisfied with their life, and that then does influence an individual's ability to be productive at work. That sense of dissatisfaction and stress can come into the professional realm, distracting and reducing efficiency overall.
I think also the other important aspect here to mention is what is happening up to the point of divorce, right? Which is often even more stressful in some ways, right? Like what leads to that couple making that decision of going their own separate ways. And of course, there might be a variety of reasons, but there are some of the extreme case scenarios where you have abusive relationships, where you have, financial difficulties, where you have some other huge disagreements in a family that are really, really difficult to reconcile. And that affects someone's mental health, well-being, and their performance at work to a degree that it's difficult to kind of even pinpoint to say that, oh, I'm there, nobody has died yet, you're not going through divorce yet, you're having some of these relationship struggles. And yet the impact of that is often really being dismissed because there isn't like any, actual real cause of it yet, right? Like, so it's very, very important to notice that it's not just the actual divorce, but all of the process that leads to it can be so incredibly stressful, and an employee, people will need extra support through that.
Absolutely. It's, and this is, I think, highlights the importance of having that ongoing conversation with someone, not just so that, will they flag when they are experiencing divorce or if they're experiencing divorce, but having an openness and communication of being able for them to flag when they're experiencing difficulties in their relationship and the impact that that's having on their emotional health generally. There's also kind of this social and psychological impact of divorce. So, not only if a couple is deciding to part ways or separate, is the kind of their separation, but that then impacts their kind of whole social life and, maybe the dynamics in their support networks, as mentioned. And that can really lead to feelings of isolation, rejection, and, that can naturally then impact or affect an employee's interactions and ability to collaborate in the workplace as well.
We'd love to hear from those of you who are listening. Say hello, and we would love to hear some of your experiences and some of your thoughts on that. What is the role of employers in supporting employees through this entire process? And if you had relationship difficulties, if you have gone through separation yourself, if you know somebody who has, what kind of support was available for you or wasn't available, what you wish was there? And yeah, please share some of your insights and some of your experiences. We would love to hear some reflections. And also, maybe there are some amazing scenarios where things have been done well and maybe you have received support. And this is a wonderful example that could help others to build on and role model how to provide that support in this case. So please share and do say hello.
Absolutely. So, I mean, we've kind of looked or done a bit of a summary here of some of the emotional impacts of divorce on individuals. I guess the last thing I'd want to just maybe highlight in this that runs through it is there's also the impact then of that separation potentially involving children and how that can impact parents and the children themselves. And that can require kind of an additional layer of support. There may be, if there's custody issues or there's going to be, less time spent with your children, there's a grief there as well. So it's not just about mourning the relationship, but it might be about mourning the family unit and coming to terms with what that looks like going forward.
Yeah. It's also what is often very difficult to go through is the shift and change in identity. So, why is it so difficult for us to come into terms with separation, with the divorce, is that we're not necessarily kind of like mourning the loss of that person. We are actually grieving the part of self that we were in that relationship. And it really, that kind of internal turmoil of identity of who am I, right? If I'm no longer a wife, if I'm no longer a husband, and it kind of leaves that vacuum in your life, it can really take a long time to recover from this, because when you look at kind of identity development, this is not so quick as like, oh, one day, I was a father and now I've lost my kids. What does that mean, right? The impact of that on your identity takes really, really long time to work through. And therefore, we have to be really kind and patient and allow people that headspace to process to process whatever that they are going through.
Absolutely. And kind of having this, open, supportive working environment can make a really big difference there. And really hearing what someone has to say and their experiences can help them navigate that transition of identity so that they're able to kind of work through that, not just internally, but within the environment, and kind of resituate themselves in that environment with this new or changed identity.
Yeah. And of course, going beyond the emotional, there are a lot of logistical struggles, a lot of practical implications that this has on people's life, right? So if you have to move homes, if you have to share custody of your children, if, again, finances, you're looking at your ways of living, your ways of commuting, there's so many different aspects that will be affected by this. And therefore, we cannot underestimate the impact of that it has on disturbing your ability to perform at the same level that it was expected for you to do before. And it is very, very common that employees do not even share some of those personal concerns until they are being brought to disciplinary performance procedure. And again, the fact that this is the first point where employer finds out that maybe the individual is going through these personal struggles and challenges, that's already too late, right? We as employers have failed to support this individual, and we fail to even see their needs, right? What we are seeing is their level of performance and what they should be contributing, right? So this is really an important notice, that every time when we see any change in employee behavior, in their performance, this is not about performance management that we should be thinking of first, but actually being really curious and empathetic to understand, like, what is it happening really in this person's life that is having this impact on their performance, and is there anything that we can do to help and support? Because most of the time, people don't just start underperforming overnight for no reason, right? And we see this over and over and over again, where employers actually fail to see this until it's really gone to their disciplinary review.
And also, fail to see the human side of it, the personal side. They might notice these drops in productivity and simply be thinking about the impact on the organization and how to raise that productivity so that the organization isn't impacted. We can't be thinking about raising productivity when we're not thinking about the human that is producing. And so it's very important that, organizations and HR professionals take this more empathetic approach, not just because it's the right thing to do and it's kind of a more helpful way of engaging with individuals and supporting individuals, but because it will lead to a more effective support strategy, which will mean that person will be able to perform better at work sooner and kind of to a higher quality if they're receiving the right kind of support and in the right environment. And when we think about kind of, going back to the ways in which these practical things can actually be affecting someone's experience of work, for someone going through divorce, like that financial impact is really significant. And a study in the Journal of Family and Economic Issues highlighted that women in particular often experience a decline in the standard of living post-divorce. And that change in lifestyle, that change in living, and the financial stress associated with that can have a really deep impact on someone's ability to focus, their commitment at work. And this kind of overall then leads to a decreased productivity. But the story behind that is, one that it's not about, performance management and setting goals and targets for increasing productivity. It's about actually addressing some of these concerns about this, or the adjustment in lifestyle and quality of living and the financial stress that's actually happening there.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely a lot of support that is there, it's not being utilized in a way that makes a difference on someone's performance, right? And it's so important to really take each case scenario as unique individual going through their own unique life experiences, and to be able to tailor those to tailor that support specifically to them. And it is, I think also when you mention impact on children, right, there is this kind of like dual aspect of childcare and the difficulty what it takes for a single person to raise their children in a way, or again when you even have a split childcare, there's a lot of very stressful logistics that are going around that when you have, let's say, shared custody. And of course it's beautiful to see when some couples can break up amicably and they can still be equally contributing parents for their children, right? But most often we see these very hostile relationships where there is this negativity that affects children, but it also, people with children will be affected even more in their way how they then show up at work. So it is really, really important that we consider that childcare element through this entire process as well.
Absolutely. That kind of the practical implications there, there's a huge amount of juggling that will then have to be done that will be impacting somebody's experience of work. And, we can talk a bit more later about how a workplace can support specifically with that kind of juggling of new personal responsibilities or changing personal responsibilities, having to do things on your own that may have been done in a partnership or may, have been shared responsibility in terms of looking after children, but also even things like managing certain things in the household, maintaining cars, boilers, heating system, when something breaks in the house, there's then only one of you to address that. And I think that it's important to recognize kind of that household load and how that then also shifts after divorce as well.
Absolutely. And it creates a huge cognitive overload on decision making, right? So if we look from kind of cognitive decision making point of view, it requires so much energy to do this. And if we are required to, if we have too much responsibility, too much decision making, and everything is on your own shoulders, from logistics point of view at home, you actually have going to have less of that cognitive decision making capacity to apply at work. So it is really important that there are some things we could maybe put in place to reduce some of this kind of cognitive load and shift some of the working priorities to kind of free up some of that energy, really. So just want to take time to say hello to those who are joining in. Hi, Oris. Hello to everyone else who's watching. Please feel free to say hello, and we'd love to hear as well some of your experiences with divorce, with breakups, and how did that affect your experience at work, what support you wish was there for you, and maybe there are some other examples where you have been supported, or if somebody else have received the right support that you could share, for us being aware of some of these best practices out there as well.
Absolutely. I'm really, really keen to hear everyone's personal experience, because as we said, kind of all of these circumstances are unique, and no doubt there are kind of lots of dynamics that we won't kind of touch on by looking at the broad picture. And, when we're kind of thinking about that cognitive load as well, you mentioned in the increased then responsibility, and also simply this adaptation to change, going as human beings, we're very adaptable. It's kind of our greatest strength, really. And we can operate in most circumstances, we will adapt. But it's the change, it's the period of moving from one circumstance to another that is the most taxing. And so not only does that have those practical implications in terms of, finances, managing kind of custody or childcare and household care, but also your self-care. So your own exercise and diet habits and routines are likely to be extremely disrupted then. And so that then becomes a kind of a process in itself of re-engaging in those habits and potentially building those habits up from scratch again. If you're in a different environment, you're kind of on different time schedules, and that requires a heavy cognitive load, as well as a lot of kind of emotional labor in terms of generating motivation and things like that. So, in terms of the workplace, as Evelyn mentioned, it's really important to acknowledge that increased load, and for this period of change, while someone is adapting, doing what you can in the working environment to decrease the cognitive load there, so that someone can make kind of an effective change in their life, like they can go through that period of adjustment quickly and as efficiently as possible. And then, it's more likely they will be a lot more able to take on a heavier cognitive load at work once that adjustment's been made.
And just like any change in life, this is one of those changes that are likely to affect every area of your life, right? We all have a variety of changes in our life, and sometimes you think, well, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's something at work, maybe there is some change with your children, maybe there is some change with your finances. But when you have a divorce, all of those changes happen at once. And that what is the most difficult to cope, emotionally, logistically, materially, physically, all of those things just happen at the same time. And even the change in your physical environment, in your surroundings, can have such a huge impact on your ability to just remain grounded and connected. So also be aware of that. For someone who is going through so much change, what they are looking for in work is that assurance, stability, that there is one constant that can be there for them with not too much disruption, with not too much change, because sometimes it is very easy to then jump in and say, oh, like, oh, the person is going through change, so we also need to change, their ways of working. We need to change their roles and responsibilities to make sure that they can go through this. But actually having the consistent expectation and standard and stability can be way more useful than overdoing some of that support and adding to the level of change for them as well.
Absolutely. It's why it's really important to kind of ask and respond to an individual's needs. It might be that they need that consistency and stability 90% of the time, but 10% they might actually just need to have a little bit of help or a slight change in their working practices. So really having this kind of dialogue about their needs, how that's changing during the process as well.
Yeah, just reflecting on a comment here by Ori, saying that what I love about this topic is that it looks at a different angle of employee engagement, and I think this. Thank you, Oris, for this. I think it is so important that very often we see a lot of those topics are being addressed in silos, right? As employee engagement is just there sitting as this beautiful, score on a shelf of our employees are engaged, without actually understanding all of these different personal influences that will affect person's ability to engage with their work, engage with their colleagues, engage with the purpose and the direction that the company is going, right? So I think definitely it's so important that we are considering these kind of topics when we talk about employee experience and employee engagement at work.
Absolutely. We can sometimes think about employee engagement and the dynamics in the workplace and, trying to drive employee engagement up. We can think about this as a closed system, as though the employee might be disengaged because there's something wrong in the working practices, or because they are unenthused by their work. And actually zooming out and really seeing the big picture, it's not a closed system. In a human is in a working context, is in a social context, a personal context, a cultural context, and all of these things are interlinked. So really making sure that kind of that attention to employee engagement is one that takes into account the bigger picture of what might be going on for them. And that can really radically change your whole engagement strategy.
Exactly, because employee engagement is not necessarily only due to the level of work environment, right? There are so many other personal influences that will affect person's ability to engage at work. And we really have to look at that in this, what we use is kind of 360 feedback about person's life, to really understand where they are coming from and why there is this shift in their motivation, in their energy levels, and their ability to focus in their productivity levels.
Certainly, and kind of thinking about productivity there, that's where we see the kind of final measure as an organization. Once we see it impacting somebody's productivity, that's often the point, and we've kind of mentioned this already, but that's often the point that our ears prick up and we start noticing that something's going on with somebody once it's been impacting their productivity. But actually, there's a lot more kind of subtle signs that we might pick up on before that. We might just notice a change in their behavior and their mood. This is why it's really important to have these regular one-to-ones, and also why it's kind of really important for line managers in particular to have these soft skills and these personal relationships with their employees and with their line managers, so that they can notice these shifts in behavior. Is someone working a bit differently with others? Are they a bit less engaged? Are they working more because they're trying, wanting to have an escape, or they're really benefiting from the stability of the job in amongst chaos? Using these as a way to ask questions. I noticed that you've been working longer hours recently. Is there something going on in your personal life? Or, I noticed that you've maybe been a bit short or impatient with other colleagues. I wonder if there's something going on at home that's putting that kind of pressure on you. And by identifying those needs earlier on, we can kind of engage in a way, we as employers can also engage with employees in a way that means that doesn't necessarily get to this point of impacting productivity, and actually we can kind of shift the system and shift the support of needs so that everything remains kind of harmonious and
absolutely. And I think also when we have some of those conversations, to be able to have a space to hold whatever experiences that person is going through, but also to be able to dig deeper and to really understand, help even them to understand what's stopping them from navigating that scenario in the best way. And very often we see some of the performance issues and we'll say, are you okay? And the person will say something like, oh, I haven't slept very well. I've not been sleeping well. And we leave it at that without actually looking at why, what exactly keeps that person awake right now. What is it that they're going through that prevents them from sleeping? So it's really being able not just to kind of look at the symptom, but really look at, what is it exactly that it's troubling you the most now. When we look at that kind of cognitive load, when we're looking at some of this kind of logistics in your life changes, when we look at some of the emotional burdens of how people are feeling, it's so important that we look at which of those is really having the biggest impact on this individual. And for one person, it can be the whole kind of like mental stress and anxiety and the pressure of emotional load. For somebody else, it could be really logistics of moving the house and not knowing where to go. For somebody else, it might be something to do with childcare and really not having resources or money at times to navigate that whole scenario. So it's really those are really sensitive topics, and employers often don't know how to have those conversations. And again, there is also kind of a question, to what extent should we? Of course, we need to understand, we need to hold that space, but at the same time, it's not up to us to provide the legal, financial, mental health support to that person. So also having those very clear boundaries and not being too kind of forceful about, you need to tell me everything and I need to know because that's the only way I can support you, right? We really need to have those boundaries and understand, like, what can I do personally, and therefore, in order for me to support that person, how much or how little do I need to know as their manager, as their colleague, to be able to support them, and where else we can direct them to. So when we look at the wider kind of the support ecosystem within the workplace, the biggest things that we can do is, first, it's a kind of accommodation of working patterns. And there are a variety of things that can be done here. And let's say you have legally at the moment, you can only request flexible ways of working once a year. And when we think about the divorce and those kind of changes that happen all the time, that is just simply not enough. So we also have to be flexible with this and understand that maybe, this once a year check-in is a legal minimum requirement, but that doesn't mean that we have to provide the minimum, right? I think just being kind and being open and looking at, is there anything else that we can do to accommodate this person's ways of working with the least disruption and to really kind of give them, maintain that stability at work, can be one of the biggest impacts that can support them. The other aspect is, are they able to work or not? And if they are not, again, looking at those figures, 75% of people say that they were less efficient at work, and 40% needed to take time off. So when you think of that, that's again a huge portion of people who didn't feel like they were even able to work, and again required time to solve some of their other issues that they're going through. There is no currently any legal requirement for supporting people through that scenario. So again, I think there is so much more that we can do. In January 2023, the Positive Parenting Alliance launched the HR initiative for parents, and there is a range of recommendations there for HR, how to support working parents. So I definitely recommend for anyone in HR, anybody with line management responsibilities, to have a look into that. There are some companies that are already implementing some of those recommendations. But I think, you know, what's important with that again, we don't just use any kind of like minimum guidance as a standard, as our limitation, right? There is no any legal requirement for employers to support employees through this scenario, right? And that's why, like when you mentioned, Valentina, at the beginning, like seeing this as any big life event, let's just treating it as such, and really being as flexible and as personalized in a way to really understand this unique experience of this unique individual, and therefore what is it that we can do to help and support them.
Absolutely. And, you know, that kind of recognizing it as that life event from an HR perspective, you can, depending on how your policies are structured, you can recognize that within an existing policy, but you can also create a divorce policy and a divorce support policy as separate as well. And I would really encourage kind of HR departments and professionals to look into that and consider that, because lots might come up in kind of the research as well that will make it kind of that support a lot more accessible to an individual. So, you know, because if you're working at an organization and you're going through this significant life event, often the first thing you might do when you're noticing how it will impact or could impact your working practices is you look for a policy. You look to see what the organization's policy is on this topic. And just seeing that divorce is recognized as a significant life event, or that, you know, that there's a divorce policy in and of itself, that can just really help somebody feel seen and heard, and make them a lot more open to sharing that life event with their workplace, with their line managers or colleagues, which will really greatly enable support kind of a lot quicker and a lot more personalized and effective if there's that openness of communication.
And again, going back at how much we need to open up and talk about this at work, right? And who needs to know and who doesn't, right? And it can be really painful to go through that scenario, and it takes time for people to go through it until they might be ready to fully talk about this. So it's useful sometimes as well to, in some of our policies, when we are putting some recommendations, that it's not just how we support people going through this, but how can we actually support others who are around them to make sure that it doesn't add, you know, too much stress, pressure, that we even know how to have those conversations around these topics, that we know where our boundaries are, right? And it's sometimes, you know, the worst kind of, the worst scenario is sometimes when people don't know what to say and what to do, and it creates this kind of awkward silence moments where you don't know whether, you know, is this person, you know, do they want me to know, do they want me to talk about it, do they not? And we see this as well when people come back to work after difficult life events. So whether that might be, you know, cancer treatment, that might be bereavement, that might be divorce, that might be whatever that might be, that requires people to take time off work for a longer period of time. When they come back, the biggest challenge that we are hearing is that other people don't actually know how to speak to them, right? And if they don't know how to interact, very often they just say nothing. And it really becomes really hard on those individuals to come back to the workplace, because they become kind of like invisible, as if everyone is like walking around them and tiptoeing around them on eggshells without actually really having that kind of human acknowledgement. So it's really, really important to empower every person in the workplace to be comfortable, to have those conversations, and actually to say, you know, what is okay and what is not okay, and how can we really hold that safe space for every person to feel seen and heard, without necessarily going too far about tell us all about it and I need to know it.
Absolutely. And I think this really kind of highlights the importance of soft skills training in the workplace. educating people about how to respond to significant life events when others are going through that, how to respond to bereavement, divorce, kind of fertility treatment, having a child, all of these things. And, we can't always assume that this is knowledge that you gain and attain in your personal or private life. Someone might not have encountered those things. They might also not be, hold that role in their personal life where they are someone who supports others emotionally or has that awareness of personal dynamics. So it can be really beneficial to kind of give those courses and that kind of training around divorce in particular, but significant life events generally in the form of workshops, seminars, or even just kind of open discussions among colleagues as in sort of organized groups can be really useful. And that all helps to contribute to a supportive working culture. Having this workplace culture that values open communication and understanding, even if someone doesn't want to communicate about the specifics of what they're going through, just having an understanding that they're going through something and how you can support in that can be really impactful. The Journal of Applied Psychology emphasized this importance of a supportive working environment in reducing the negative impact of life stresses on employees. And so, we're seeing this come out in scientific research as well, but I think we also know it from experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, having that supportive working environment and the kind of psychological safety where, if you're going through so much stress and change in your personal life, and now you come to work and there you have to put a mask and be brave and pretend and perform, that just it's inhumane, right? So what is it exactly that we can do to create those working environments that can be real and human and authentic, and it allows people to come to work with however they are feeling, right? When we look at some of those recommendations from legal point of view, there are things like flexible working request. We have things like sabbatical leave. We have things like parental leave, which is, again, it's a legal requirement to provide 4 weeks of parental leave a year. But now what is also important to note that all of this leave from kind of legal perspective is unpaid. So if there is anything that you can do as an employer to cover some of that leave, to create a paid leave, considering as well how costly it is to go through the divorce, to go through all of these big life changes, we would definitely encourage to see if there is anything you can do to continue supporting that person at work. And again, if you have that supportive working environment, person is less likely to then request time off work, which then will help them to integrate back into routine, into productivity, and kind of, to have that kind of stable way of continuing your day as expected can be useful to many people. But also we need to understand that it might be detrimental for some other people's mental health, emotional well-being. So we really need to be careful about making those decisions, and it's not up to us to decide whether that person wants to be at work or they need to take time off. And also considering their financial situation in that is that sometimes the reason why they're not taking that time off because they cannot afford it in that situation, even though they really would be better off with the time off. So it's really important to consider this kind of sensitive topic between finances and the time to take some time off to deal with whatever they need to deal with. Because if person stays at work and they keep just being present here and not really performing and not even like healing and addressing their own emotional concerns, but they cannot afford to take time off unpaid, you might lose a lot of productivity over the following months. You might be just better off giving a few weeks or so of paid leave for that person to recover quickly, and they will be much more appreciative and they will be able to perform much better. So we really, really encourage to look at what can you do in your company's policies and procedures to create some sort of paid leave for individuals who are going through those changes, because again, this is not a legal requirement, but that is just simply a human and considerate thing to do for someone who is in that situation.
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of important to recognize here what the organization can do. So in that respect, really looking at the big picture and actually recognizing the value of offering some paid leave where possible can have a huge impact. And also recognizing what an organization can't do, but an expert can do.
Yeah.
So offering access to specialized counseling can be extremely useful. And also even education and support around finances. So workshops on financial planning, on adjusting post-divorce, can really help employees manage that financial impact in a way that might mean that they may be more able to take unpaid leave, or the psychological impact of that financial adjustment might be minimized, so that actually it's not affecting their productivity as much, and actually not negatively impacting their well-being as much as well.
Absolutely. So having that expert support to counseling, to therapy, to relationship advice, to help them to navigate that change more effectively, can have really, really huge support, can be a really big support for them at that time. But also legal services and legal advice, because we know that there are so many legal financial implications for people going through the divorce. And it can be really stressful and really expensive as well to access that support. So as employers, if we can provide that legal support through our employee assistance programs, if we have some other relationships with some other legal institutions, that we can actually recommend as well some sources, whether it's employer who's paying for it or not, but even taking that decision making away from that person and saying, hey, here is the right person or the right agency or the right legal support to help you, advise you, and support you through that. That in itself can be really, really useful. So not everything is about money, and of course not every organization has unlimited budget to support everyone indefinitely. There are boundaries, of course, how far we can do this, but we really have to look at certain things that doesn't necessarily cost a huge amount of money, right? It's again having some of those relationships with other agencies, with other legal institutions, with other advisory. So there are like consultancies who are now specifically consulting people to go through that process, that are away from the legal support, right? So there's a lot of things like that we can establish to support that individual, that doesn't actually cost us. It's just an introduction to the right expertise for the right support that person might need at that point.
Absolutely. And this, as we've kind of mentioned running through this, is being able to identify the most effective intervention is a lot about having an open dialogue with the person going through that divorce. Not just for how to support them, but the more we do this, the more we talk about it, the more we learn, and how that can then impact how we might write or rewrite our policies, what kind of support we might then be looking for externally in terms of how to best kind of manage these situations and how to best support people through them. So really kind of seeing this as a learning journey as well, every case on a case-by-case basis, making sure that there's something there that's been learnt to potentially support the next person who may be going through an experience like this.
Yeah. Another important thing I think to mention is the whole kind of paperwork and legal documentation, and the changes in name, changes in your titles, changes in different kind of like financial status and so on. Sometimes, most of the time, when people are going through that divorce, they will also require, for legal purposes, statement from the employer to confirm their income, for example, as that is then taken in consideration in sharing finances and making decisions for childcare and so on. So making sure that there is kind of minimum fuss around some of this documentation, that we would not add more stress onto that person by not giving them specific information or documents. But also, it can also, we've seen some cases where, for example, employers provide documents for these legal financial reasons that are required to confirm, let's say, their income. But then some of those documents get into the hands of the partner, and the partner tries to use it for their own different purposes. So, for example, there's also like threats to the employer, where, for example, the spouse contacts employers of their ex by trying to cause some harm, by giving some information about something that person has done, and so on. And again, it can cause really a lot of stress, because on top of the whole kind of relationship struggle, now you also have your partner who's trying to cause harm on your relationship with your employer. So it is very important to separate the two, and not to kind of get involved in any of those cases, as again, it's as emotive as it can be. And very often some of those, there are some huge allegations that are sometimes being made against each person. It's important that we really see this in that emotional context, and allow that person to address one case before we would ever go into really looking into that person's performance, or maybe something illegal that they have done against the employers, and so on. We really have to take some of those cases with a bit of pinch of salt. And it's really shocking that people do things like that to each other, but yet it does have this huge impact on our workplace as well, and we need to learn how to navigate these whole scenarios too.
Absolutely. These are kind of some of the things that we wouldn't necessarily expect as being an impact of divorce on work. And I think kind of this session hopefully has highlighted some of the more common things, some of the ways that we know that we can be supportive, that can be kind of more broadly applicable, but also some of these smaller or kind of not smaller, but less frequent or less obvious ways in which divorce can impact the individual, but also their experience of work, and then on productivity in the organization generally. So we've kind of covered, the emotional impact, the practical impact, and how organizations can respond. But also kind of we'll signpost and have signposted a little bit to where you can get kind of more specific information and kind of guidance, particularly with HR and
Yeah, absolutely. So we've I put in a comment the Positive Parenting Alliance HR initiative in January 2023, and there are some companies that have partnered up with PPA to provide more support for employees going through divorce, separation, and they're creating new policies for that. So some of those companies are Asda, Tesco, Metrobank, PwC, and Unilever. So if you want to look at some of these best practices and what are some of those specific policies and how they have created and what they have agreed on to support their employees, then those are companies to definitely look into and have a look at some of those practices and policies for sure. So so thank you very much to everyone who's listening. Thank you for your comments and engagement. If you do need any more information and support, please do let us know. Our expertise is not from legal perspective. While we are aware of these kind of legal boundaries and remits within which we have to operate, our expertise is really in the human experience and really understanding the nuances and the complexity of what this person is going through, and therefore how we can consider that while we designing our workplace well-being and support initiatives. So if there is any of that support and advice that you would like, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can explore what are those different human needs in the workplace, and how we can explore how to co-design support that is specifically tailored for your company and for your employees. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Oris. Thank you to everyone else who's listening silently. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any more questions, comments, or suggestions.
Thank you very much, everyone. Catch you next time.